Good morning. I thought on this beautiful Sunday morning, I should raise a couple of issues that had been sticking in my throat during the past week. Among those was the issue of the colors of the old South African flag that appeared on the tail wings of the Mirages at the Swartkop Air Force Base Museum, where there was the ceremony to receive the mortal remains of the 14 soldiers that lost their lives in that totally unnecessary operation in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. Now, of course, first and foremost, one truly shares in the grief and the pain of the families and the loved ones of those soldiers who laid down their lives in the service of our nation. And I've done so numerous times in Parliament and at other public events. I've also said that it was sad, that it was totally unnecessary for those soldiers to have died, because it really wasn't necessary for our South African National Defence Force to be deployed as part of the South African National Defence Force's participation in the SADC offensive mission in support of the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, because that is what the mission was really all about. I've personally made calls to some of the family members, some of the wives of those soldiers who passed on, where I managed to get the contact details. And I've extended my heartfelt sympathies to them. So those who try to say that my concern about the colors of the old South African flag is callous because I do not care about the soldiers that lost their lives are totally wrong. I'm unapologetic about having expressed that concern. And that does not mean that I do not know that there is an Air Force museum at Swartkop Air Force Base. Of course I know. In fact, I've been there myself. I've seen those Mirages and the rest of what is on display in that museum. But my concern was twofold. First of all, I do not think it was proper for those who arranged the welcoming ceremony, the return ceremony of the mortal remains of our soldiers, to have allowed that procession to pass the Air Force Museum, while you have Mirages of this old South African Defence Force with the colours of the old South African flag present, that will inevitably end up in the videos and in the photos of that solemn event. I think it was a poor planning process, and the protocol division of the South African government and of the South African National Defence Force need to take responsibility for an insensitive mistake that was made. Now, why am I so concerned about the colors of the old apartheid flag being on display on museum pieces? Some people who responded to my concern tried to ridicule me. But what they miss in the concern that I've expressed is that the South African flag of the old apartheid government, together with the vuurkleur and other symbols of Boer colonial racism, are not just historical relics of the past. They're still very active in the body politic of our country. Those flags, those colors, are still on a consistent basis being used and abused by so-called Boere and Afrikaners who continue to be racist, who find it impossible to become part of the new South Africa because of their racism. They still use those symbols as active political instruments of mobilization. It happens throughout the country. A year ago, I was at a court case of a terrible assault by two whites on a black farm worker in Groblersdal. Outside in the street, outside the magistrate's court, these Boere were mobilizing in support of those racists who attacked a fellow black South African. They were on their horses. They were flying the old Vierkleur and the flag of the old Apartheid regime. Now certainly, when those symbols are utilized in that way, when they are utilized in the way that they had been this past week, when some of these misdirected Boere and Afrikaners marched to the Embassy of the United States of America in Pretoria, displaying the Vierkleur, displaying that apartheid flag, singing the racist anthem of the old apartheid regime, die stem, then these are not just historical throwbacks. They're active in our current political landscape. And therefore they are dangerous because they're instruments of mobilization for racism, for hankering back to the apartheid era, for hankering back to the period of white supremacist colonialism in South Africa. And in that context, whether they're on the back of a mirage that is no longer flying, whether they are flown at the United States of America Embassy, in that whole misplaced, ironic situation that we had over the last couple of weeks with AfriForum and Solidariteit, having spouted their mouths off and lied about the situation in South Africa, claiming that whites are being subjected to genocide, which is absolute poppycock. And then managing to trigger that lunatic in the White House, Donald Trump, to issue a presidential decree opening the possibility for Boere and Afrikaners to get a possibility to become refugees in the United States of America. So ironic. And how did that whole little performance and propaganda and in fact treasonous action of Kali Kriel and his cohorts backfire? Because now they have a presidential order from the President of the United States of America inviting them to become refugees in Anchorage or somewhere in rural, hillbilly United States of America. And of course they don't want to go, because these people know very well that they have it very good in South Africa. With their double cab Hilux bakkies, their beach homes, their braais, all the privilege and the benefits of white privilege still in South Africa. They are the privileged of this country. And yet they nagged and whined and complained and lied. And they used the symbols of the past, the vierkleur, the flag of the apartheid regime, which just yesterday eventually was voted out on the 27th of April 1994. But despite the fact that it has been voted out, the consequences of apartheid continues to live in the lives of the majority of Black and African South Africans every single day. The consequences of a weak African National Congress that fails to address the challenges that apartheid has left us with, that is not prepared to deal with expropriation of land without compensation, that does not challenge the wanton, blatant racism from a very large sector of the white community, that allow racist enclaves such as Oranje, Eureka, and other villages and residential areas that are kept artificially lily white to exist. The fact that they don't change the economy to empower the majority of Black African South Africans. That the economic imbalances of the past has been maintained. That whites remain the major landowners in South Africa and remain in control of the commanding heights of our economy. So these racist whites are utilizing those symbols of apartheid against the majority of the people, of the populace, of the residents of South Africa. And it is with clear intention that I am doing this video with this t-shirt on, reading Tina Bantu, we the people. We the people. The majority of South Africans who are Black and African. We the people have the right to be free from racism. We the people, Tina Bantu, have the right to be free from the lies of the white supremacist racists. We the people have the right to demand that every South African should be a true patriot, working for a non-racial and united South Africa on the basis of justice, of reconciliation that can only happen once there is restitution. And that restitution must mean the expropriation of land without compensation, the fundamental transformation of our economy, and restitution being paid for the hurt and the damage and all the harm that had been inflicted by apartheid and racism that continues also because of the selling out and the weakness of the African National Congress and now this grand coalition with white supremacist parties such as the DA and the Freedom Front Plus. So it is a direct insult to every South African who want to see justice, who want to live in a country where racism is finally erased, to have that active symbol not just a museum piece, but an active symbol of mobilization against the majority of Black African South Africans, of mobilization in favor of racism, of mobilization in favor of a continuing ownership through theft of the bulk of the land in this country. Those colors of the old racist apartheid South African flag. No matter where it is still an instrument of political subjugation. It is still an expression of white supremacist privilege. It is still an insult. Not an historical museum piece insult, but an active insult against the majority of Black and African South Africans. So the last week I've been subjected to a literal tsunami of attacks on social media, specifically on X and on Facebook, by these racist, white, I suppose in some instances, they call themselves Boers, Afrikaners. They were coming for me. They were calling me an idiot. They were trying to use the fact that at Swartkop Air Force Base it is a museum. But you just scratch a little bit under the surface. And they don't just talk about the museum, those museum display pieces that are those mirages. But very quickly they start telling you about how emotional they feel about those colors, the orange, the white and the blue, as they say in Afrikaans, oranje, blonde, blue. They tell you that this is the flag under which they had pride to be South Africans. But of course, only white, exclusivist, privileged South Africans. So in their attacks, they actually revealed themselves as the racists, as the white supremacists that they in reality are. And in their attacks, especially when they start singing the praises of those colors, symbols of that colonial and land theft past, they confirmed exactly what I was saying. That to have those colors displayed, whether it's on a museum piece or anywhere else in South Africa, is utterly unacceptable, because they continue to be not just a hankering, disgusting and nauseating as it is, a hankering back to the old apartheid past, but a deliberate, active mobilization of white supremacist racism, of boerevolk, Nazism and fascism against a democratic, non-racial and just South Africa. So let me be clear. I'm entirely unapologetic about having raised the issue of those colors on the back of the wings of the mirages. I'm entirely unapologetic and very assertive about my criticism of the continuing use of part of the old destem, the old racist apartheid anthem in our current national anthem. I fully support the decision that the economic freedom fighters had taken to sit down when that destem part of the national anthem is sung. And I do so every time I'm in an official occasion where the anthem is sung. I believe as quickly as possible we must get rid of that aberration, and we must simply have Nkosi Sikelel in Africa in its original form to be sung as our national anthem. But while I'm talking about these issues, let me again raise an issue that I've raised many times. I'm truly sick and tired, in Afrikaans gatvol, to have to drive on roads in South Africa that have the names of Boer generals that were part of the subjugation, humiliation, and colonialism under which the majority of black South Africans and Africans had been subjected to. Thina Bantu, we the people, must assert ourselves and get rid of those names. I'm also truly gatvol of the large number of schools, whether primary or secondary schools, throughout South Africa that still have the names of apartheid heroes, of Generaal Christian de Wet, Louis Botha, Herzog, and go on and on. Whenever I visit towns in rural South Africa, I see these schools. And I ask myself, how on earth do we allow them to continue to have those names? I've been campaigning that those names must go. And I've also been campaigning that the procedures that have been put in place for name changes are far too cumbersome. It is being used by the racists in order to prevent name changes from taking place. They utilize those procedures to keep those names in place. And those names, if you're a child, if you're a learner at a school called Christian de Wet Laerskool, means that that name is supposed to be a symbol. It is supposed to be something that you should strive towards. That the person whose name your school carries must be someone that you should emulate. Now, do you really, truly expect black South African learners, children, to go and emulate Christian de Wet or Barry Herzog or Jan Smuts or Louis Botha or Delaray? It is utter rubbish. There should be no bureaucratic impediment to changing those names forthwith. And I will continue to campaign and lobby for those changes that are needed to take place like yesterday. Similarly, about all these monuments, statues of Afrikaner racist leaders that still litter the landscape of South Africa. When you go to the main entrance to Parliament, there's Louis Botha on his horse, a racist colonist, a Boer general. But the most prominent statue at the entrance to Parliament is of that racist. If we had a true revolution, a true liberation in this country, we the people, Thina Bantu, would have risen and destroyed that statue. I don't even want to see it somewhere in a museum for relics, because then it still can be used as an instrument of mobilization. Like the colors on the back wings of those Mirages at Swartkop Air Force Base. No, I just want it gone. The same for Paul Kruger's statue in Church Square in Tshwane. It is an aberration. A racist president of the old Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek, standing in a place of pride in the center of our capital city, and we don't remove it. The time had come that we as South Africans develop an urgency to get rid of all the symbols of racism. That we, the people, Tina Bantu, rise up, speak up, and say enough is enough. Because we have the rubbish that we experienced with the lies, with the misrepresentations about what is happening in South Africa, from white Afrikaner supremacists, exactly because we are treating them with kid gloves. Because we allow this nonsense of Louis Botha's statue at the entrance to Parliament, of Paul Kruger in the center of Tshwane, of the colors of the racist, fascist apartheid flag on display. So these whites become strident and arrogant. They can badmouth us in the international community. They can cause treason, because that's what they did. They committed treason against this nation with the rubbish that Solidarity and AfriForum went to tell on international forums, also in the United States of America. And the time had come that we put our feet down, collectively as a South African nation. All of us who want to see a united, truly reconciled, truly just South Africa. And we must say to these people from Solidarity, from AfriForum, from the Boeramag, and all the rest of these racist aberrations, if you want to go, voetsek. But when you leave, don't come back. Don't go there, find yourself in Arizona, somewhere as a refugee, suffering, hankering back to the green grass, to the braaivleis, to the party on the banks of Hartbeespoort Dam, to the beach house. Don't come back, hankering for this white privilege that you enjoyed here in South Africa. If you leave, my view is that we should then simply cancel your South African citizenship. Go and become a citizen of the United States of America and see how nice it is. Years ago, when I was South Africa's ambassador in the Netherlands, I was constantly harassed by South African whites who left South Africa before and just after 1994 because they believed that the country was going to collapse, that it was going to be a disaster. They couldn't live under black rule, blah, blah, blah. And some of them ended up in the Netherlands. They were like wet chickens, hating the always wet, cloudy damp, dark, cold weather. They were hankering to their prize, but they couldn't do it in the small little yards and the balconies of their small little homes, the size of the lounge that they had in South Africa. So they were deeply sad, unhappy people. They would come to the South African embassy trying to hanker back to the apartheid past. And I gave them a hard, cold shoulder. I was not interested in them. They made their choices. They made their bed. It was time for them to sleep in it. Those of them who said that they wanted to come back to South Africa, I couldn't care less. They had to see their own way. I wasn't going to go 1 millimeter out of my way as ambassador of a new South Africa to try and assist and support white racists who left South Africa in rejection of a majority black democratically elected government, and who now wanted to come and knock on the door of the embassy of that very same government and asking for assistance to go back. The few times that I interacted with them, I could see that they were unrehabilitated. They were just hankering for the old past. They were still in their hearts racists. They still had this supremacist attitude as whites. So why on this God's earth would I have bothered myself about them as the ambassador of a new and democratic South Africa? And today, if the Kali Creoles of this world, if the Boeramagte want to leave, they can voetsack, but they mustn't try to come back. We must close that door, because enough is enough. It is now over 30 years since we had our first democratic elections. We still have these white racists running around with their oranje, blanje, blue, orange, white, blue, racist, fascist flags, with their vuurkleur, singing Die Stem written by Langenhoven, going to the embassy of the United States of America in Tshwane, demanding to be saved. Saved from what? They're the most privileged group still in South Africa. They've got the highest employment levels. They've got ownership of the land, which wrongly is protected in our constitution because of Section 25. They've built up savings from their apartheid past. They are privileged, but they want to be protected. While the majority of black African South Africans are living in poverty, have no access to land, battle to get employment with some of the highest unemployment figures in the world. But these whites want to go and shed insincere crocodile tears at the door of the United States of America imperialist embassy. They want to be saved by, of all people, irony of ironies, Donald Trump. You know that you're ideologically depraved of any depth, that you've got no moral grounding, that you are indeed a lost soul when you see Donald Trump, of all people, as your savior. So now that I got this off my shoulders, now that I've spoken to those hundreds, I don't know, I didn't count them, or perhaps thousands of white Afrikaners who thought the fact that I complained about the colors of the old South African flag on the back of a Mirage Museum piece at Swartkop Air Force Base was just the right place to come and insult. You know, the more you spoke, the more you insult, the more you continued to praise the colors of the old South African flag. The more you did all of that, you revealed yourself for the racist minions, intellectual non-entities, supremacist idiots that you are. You can hate me. You can insult. You can call me whichever name you can possibly think up. I don't care. For me, as long as you're a racist, you're a despicable, rejectable human being. As long as you're a racist and you try to display the racist symbols of the past that inflicted so much destruction and harm and suffering on the majority of Black and African South Africans, you deserve no mercy. Your colors must be trashed. The names of your racist colonial generals must be trashed. The museums, the statues of your apartheid history must be trashed. Because that's where it belongs. In the trash bin, in the dustbin of history. And if our laws are not strong enough to deal with these issues, if our laws are not strong enough to deal with the issue of racism and the continued expression of racism by white, unrepented, unrehabilitated, racist South Africans, then we must strengthen those laws. We must deal with those racists. They must be charged. They must be arrested. And when found guilty, in terms of legislation that has teeth, they must go to jail. For my interest, as far as I'm concerned, they should rot in jail. Because we've reached out. We have tried. We have spoken reconciliation. We even used strange phrases that never reflected the reality of South Africa, such as a rainbow nation. And yet they persisted with their racism. Now it's enough. Now it is the time, right now, sekunjalo, to draw the line in the sand and say, thus far and no further. You continue, you will be dealt with. You will be held accountable for your racism. When you, Kali Kriel, you, Ernst Roots, and the rest of your gang go and tell lies about South Africa and misrepresent our country, you should be charged with treason. You should be arrested. You should be arraigned in court. And when found guilty, you should be imprisoned. We will not change this country. We will not bring an end to racism. We will not transform our economy. We will not change the land ownership that still continues to be in the hands of the majority of white South Africans. White South Africans are the owners of this land, while the people of this country, we the people, Thina Bantu, remains without land. Do not change any of this by continuing to be nice, by continuing to ask, by continuing to plead. Because you've shown yourselves that you will not reciprocate. You will not reach out. You've shown yourselves to be unrehabilitated, and in many instances unrehabilitatable racists. So then one must deal with you. In terms of the law, uncompromisingly so, harshly so. And those of you who go to jail, let you rot in jail, because you deserve it. And those of you who want to flee, who want to become refugees, who want to sit in exile, voetsek, go to exile and see how you're going to suffer. But for this country's sake, for the sake of Thina Bantu, we the people, we must now put our collective foot down. Enough is truly enough. So I greet all of you, my fellow South Africans, those who want to be part of a truly just, united, and hopefully reconciled country. I greet you in the knowledge that we will only achieve that reconciliation if the land can be returned to the true owners, if the economy can be transformed, so that truly the people, we the people, Thina Bantu, will be in control. Have a nice Sunday, but do not take my smile as weakness. Do not take the patience that we as the majority of South Africans have shown as weakness. You will be sorely mistaken, because the hourglass for you, the racists, the white supremacists, those who want to glorify the orange, white, and blue racist flag and colors, who want to sing die stem, who want to pay homage at Church Square to Paul Kruger. For you, the end is now. Good day.